numerator. So a 0 of the numerator. What would I put in for x that would make this 0? So the way to find that is 4x plus 1 equals 0. Remember that? We set it equal to 0 to find the 0. So 4x equals negative 1. So x equals negative 1/4. So my x-intercept is negative 1/4. So it's going to cross the axis at negative 1/4, 0. So I'm going to go ahead and put a point there. Part of my graph is going to cross at that point. Vertical asymptote. How do we find the vertical asymptote? 0's at the denominator. So x squared minus 1 equals 0. Some of you are going to solve this one way, some the other way. When I look at this one, I think factor. So my answers would be negative 1 and 1. Some of you, when you see this problem, you're going to do add 1 to both sides and take the square root. So you get that both ways. So either way that you work it, your vertical asymptotes are going to be at negative 1 and 1. So I'm going to go put vertical lines there. So since I have two vertical asymptotes, the graph's going to look one way here, different in between here, and different over here. So we're going to have three different graphs. So let's find our horizontal asymptote. How do you find the horizontal asymptote?
By comparing the degrees.
Comparing the degrees. So here degree 1, here degree 2. So it's smaller in the numerator than it is the denominator. And when it's smaller in the numerator, it's y equals 0. Now remember we made that green because at least one of these three areas, the graph's going to get really close to it but never touch. But there may be one or two areas where it actually goes all the way through the green line. And if you type this into your calculator, you've already probably seen what it looks like. We're going to use our calculator to make the table, so go ahead and type that in your calculator. And don't forget when you type it in, that has to be in parentheses and that has to be in parentheses.
Why do we even draw lines things like go over it? Like, what's the
Because you need to know that there's at least one place where it doesn't. It just goes to the line. So did you get a table? And I know that there's going to be negative 1 where there's nothing, it says error, and positive 1 where there's an error. And when you take your test, you're going to get to use your graphing calculator, but I'll need to see this chart right here, everything that we've done. But then once you use find the chart on your calculator, write it in. So what happened to this area? Not yet, but what happens when I try like negative 2? What was next to negative 2? Negative 2.3 repeating. So I'm going to graph that one. I need to get a couple points on each side of that to see what the graph's looking like. So I'm going to try negative 3. What happens at negative 3? Negative 1.3. What about negative 4? What was that?
Negative 1.
Negative 1? So it's getting smaller and smaller, isn't it? And going to where it almost touches that. What about negative 1.5? What was that? Negative 4? So that part looks like this. Okay, let's try some numbers between -1 and 1. So in between those two asymptotes. So I'm going to try like -0.5, 0, and 0.5 and see if that gives me an idea of the graph. What shows up next to -0.5? 1.3? Okay, what shows up next to 0? -1? And we already had 1 point right there, right? So you can kind of see where the graph goes. And at a half?
-4.
Negative what?
-4.
4? So the graph in there looks like this. Okay, the other side, I'd probably try like 1.5, 2, and 2.5. What shows up at 1.5? 1.6? 5.6? At 2? 3? At 2.5? 2.09? So just look at your chart. What number is it approaching? The y value, the farther down you go. So you got 2, it's only going to 2? It's approaching what? 0. So I can go ahead and fill this in. If it was approaching 2, I'd have another intercept here, so it's going something like that. Okay, let's talk about our domain. What is the farthest point, the smallest x value I could have? -infinity. And then every number for x works until I get to -1. And -1 does not work, so I use parentheses. Then I start back up at -1 and go to +1. And then 1 to infinity. This is easy? No? Okay. Range. Range is the values that I could put in, or that will show up for y. What I put in for x, what values will I get for y? -infinity always works. This always works. This always works. It really doesn't stop at 0, because is there something I could put in for x that I would get 0 for y?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That one. And then everything up. So actually the range is -infinity to +infinity. Okay, Emma.